His name is Rob Rinder, but for me he's always going to be Judge Rinder, the legal eagle who's the lord of daytime television with a brand new show on today. Welcome, Rob, to Talk Radio. Or may I say, is it your highness, your eminence, your worship, your reverence?
All of the above.
Your honour, that's what it should be, is that your honour?
I'll live with that. Judge will do, Paul. It's nice to see you this morning.
Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming in before the first day of your new show. It's Crime Stories.
Crime Stories, yeah, where everybody's going to get an opportunity to really see what it was like to investigate true crime, some of which you will have read about in the newspapers, but this gives you the inside story from the point of view of those who actually investigated the case and solved it, those who were the victims in some instances, to see what some of these crimes does to individuals and their families. And you get to hear me describe and take you through the whole process. It's really exciting. And of course, the main thing is you get to relive the drama. And it looks like a really high-end drama. I have to say, I know people come in and rather inauthentically say, oh, I'm very proud of this programme and I want people to watch it for their own self-interest. I really am. I think it's really great. Lots of people come to me and said, gosh, I would like to have sat on a jury. This is your opportunity.
And in fact, our regular TV critic on a Monday and Friday, Mike Ward from the Daily Express and Daily Star, is a huge fan of this new series.
Oh, really? That's
and
good
I
to
used
hear.
to present a show many years ago in London only called Crime Monthly, a police appeals show, and we had a little drama reconstruction in that. Yeah. This looks like at times like a movie.
Oh, I think so.
I mean, it is remarkably done. And the case today is it's a very disturbing case about a 24-year-old young woman who's murdered.
Yes, very sad. And I'm not going to tell people what it is, but you'll read about it and see it. What's really interesting is how these crimes develop, how they happen, why they happen, and it gives you a real and genuine insight into that. But above all else, sometimes we read about cases. I remember, Paul, I used to do really serious cases that people have read about, and there was always a difference between how the media reported them and what it was like actually to defend or prosecute in them, and there was usually a complete gulf between what the media reported and actually what was going on. So this case gives you the opportunity to hear from those who are actually involved what really happened, and I have to say I think that's really important. And of course as well, one of the things I'm really proud of is it gives a voice to the family, particularly in the case you're referring to, which I have to say was really moving when I saw it.
Where did they find you, Rob?
Where did they find me?
Put you on TV in the first place?
Well, it has to be dark, that's what I say. Well, it's a really interesting question. I didn't sort of seek stardom by any stretch of the imagination. Well, like you, I suspect, Paul, it's not just one thing. I used to have an interest, a hobby, writing scripts, simply as a pastime. And I was, as I say, doing lots of cases that people would have heard of. And the last serious case I was doing was in the Turks and Caicos Islands, which I only, frankly, knew of because every year there was Miss World when I was young, and there was always Miss Turks and Caicos. Yep. Apparently it's in the Caribbean. And,
in fact, I've been there on a cruise off of the Florida Keys. You can go around and you spend like a day there.
I know, but not the good bit.
No, it's the haunt of millionaires, or the bit they won't let us cruisers on.
That's right. Anyway, they were under investigation and the trial's still on, in fact, so I can't talk about it too much. But in my spare time, I used to write scripts, and I went to sell one to ITV, and of course ITV gave me their undivided indifference. You know what television is like. It's marvellous, and then they're sitting there actually in a coma. And I followed up the next day, and the woman who had listened to my pitch was more interested in perhaps me doing this, Helen Warner, and kind of very short story long, she put it on telly, which is unusual.
Now, the fantastic thing about the show was, I thought, obviously your good self, because you've got a wonderful way of letting us know what you're thinking without saying a word sometimes. Very expressive face. Is that something you learn at judge school? Because I used to cover court cases, high courts, crown courts, county courts when I trained as a local paper journalist, and you kind of knew when the judge was getting impatient. You kind of knew when the judge thought the barrister was pushing it, and you knew when the judge didn't believe a word the witness was saying without them saying a word.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes you just, have to give them, I have to say, just the right amount of eye. But no, I don't think you don't learn that. No, I think it's important to be honest, isn't it? I mean, I think one of the reasons people respond to the programme is because I'm saying, I hope, what most sensible people, and by the way, that's most people, are just thinking.
Although you must have had cases where you thought, what are the jury thinking? Because I've covered cases, quite long cases. I mean, this was back in the early 80s. Yeah. And, you talk to the police officers, you talk to the barristers. Sometimes even the defence barristers say to me, we haven't got a snowball in Hades chance of this one. Cut to the jury returns a not guilty verdict.
You never know what a jury's thinking, and that's right. And sometimes you look for clues, inevitably, when they're sitting there wondering what they're thinking. But, I have to say, as you rightly say, you can never tell. And so very often you'll think, oh, that's significant that so-and-so has become the foreman of the jury. But because in this country, we never find out. And unlike in America, we can't even question afterwards why and how they came to their decision. So it's really interesting.
And what do you think, as a TV judge, as somebody knows presenting this fascinating documentary series, what do you think of televising court cases in this country?
That's a really good question. First of all, they already are. They are now. There's going to be a pilot scheme where we can see judges giving out sentences. And I wrote a piece not too long ago saying I'm not sure I'm in favour of it for this reason. You just talked about covering long trials, and here's the problem. In really long cases, even serious cases, a murder case, for example, like one of the ones we're going to see today at 2:00, very often they're really long, and there may only be 20 minutes of drama, 20 minutes of interesting cross-examination over perhaps 3 or 4 weeks of a trial.
I think that came out very clearly in America in the O.J. Simpson case.
Exactly so.
There were high points, but there were dreadfully tedious hours
and hours. And what worries me is because it's TV and because it's the media, you only want the good and sexy bits. And so really important trials get reduced down to 10 minutes of highlights. And the result is there becomes a media frenzy about that rather than focusing on some of the less interesting evidence. Now, of course, you can warn a jury to ignore all of that, but we live in the real world. And I worry about a media frenzy, just like OJ, we're talking about that trial, resulting in individuals who are facing serious charges being prejudiced. So I'm not sure that it's a great idea for cameras to be in courts when it comes to criminal trials, the whole thing. But I do think it's a good idea for us to be able to see why and how somebody's sentenced. One of the things that this series covers is 2 very powerful instances of miscarriages of justice. And I think what that's going to do is get the public really to focus on how and why. Very rarely it is in this country things can go wrong. And very often it can be somebody's individual prejudice, even a jury's group of prejudice, which result in somebody's wrongful conviction. So it's important they focus only on the facts of the case.
We've got Rob Rinder with us, Judge Rinder, of course. The new show is fantastic. It's called Crime Stories. It starts 2:00 this afternoon on ITV1. It involves the murder of 21-year-old Laura Davis, a very moving case indeed. And you mentioned a couple of miscarriages of justice there.
Yes, the Victor Neelan case, a man that spent over a decade in prison for an attempted rape he didn't commit. And of course, the very famous Stephen Downing case. This was a boy who was accused of killing somebody in a graveyard. And he was clearly incapable of giving evidence. He should have had an appropriate adult. He had complex and special needs. He admitted the crime. Fast forward.
This is back in the 1970s
exactly
when
so.
he'd been watching Top of the Pops and there was a Slade episode on or something.
I'm not sure that. Well, I'm not sure there was a Slade episode on. I don't remember that part of it. What I do know is the interesting part of it, of course, is that he was in custody for over 2 decades until, and this is a very interesting thing, a local journalist, Don Hale, got involved in the case. And he changed everything. And what happened, quite clearly, was that there hadn't been a proper investigation of the forensic material in the case, which ultimately absolved him. And of course, the tragedy is the killer is still at large. But what we learn is how that can go wrong. And, I think very often the police get a bad rap, and that's really sad. We very rarely hear about the amazing work that the police do. We only hear about things when they go wrong. And what you see up here is a series of mistakes. It wasn't conspiracy.
No.
It's just people adding 1 and 1 together and making 5.
Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely fascinating to meet you, Rob. You must come back and see us again.
It's been an above-average pleasure, Paul.
It's Judge Rinder there, the man who shoots from the lip and the hip. He's on 2:00 this afternoon on ITV1 with Crime Stories. Make sure you catch it. This is Talk Radio. It's 9:30. We'll get you talking.